guys. I really am glad that I got to do this particular interview because there are many of you who might be watching that are suffering with one autoimmune illness and managing it with medication without getting to root cause. And this interview is really a shot across the bow to all of you. Rather than trying to scare you, I am so desperate that you get this information because there are so many people out there who are not aware that if you have one autoimmune illness, that your chances of developing further autoimmune illnesses later in life are a lot higher. So today's interviewee has been diagnosed with 4 autoimmune illnesses over the course of her life. And she tells you about her journey and how she didn't realize this at all and is now getting to the root cause of all of her autoimmune issues. It's not a one and done. She's still on her journey, but she is finding lots of relief through diet and lifestyle changes. And this is what I wish for you, that you can get started on your journey, start making those changes, and start getting to the root cause. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Hi, and welcome to Mind Shifters. I'm your host, Mireille Wagner, and today on the show we have Joanne Pappas Nottage. Joanne is a board-certified functional medicine health coach trained through the Functional Medicine Coaching Academy. She's a speaker, health coach, and founder of Embrace Functional Health. Joanne is passionate about educating and empowering others in the search for a new approach to addressing autoimmune disease, cognitive decline, and food sensitivities. Welcome to the show, Joanne. Great to have you here.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited about this.
Great. I was so glad that you said yes to doing this interview because you're the first person so far that I've interviewed with multiple autoimmune syndrome. So that means you have several autoimmune diseases that you've kind of picked up over the years. Do you want to just take us through where it all started? But I think very importantly, what I want to highlight is for a lot of people out there who have one autoimmune disease, I think you and I have just briefly discussed the statistics or the odds of getting another autoimmune disease. I've heard that it's something like 3 times more likely to get another autoimmune disease in the following 10 years. How was that for you? Was that the case?
Exactly the case. So I'm really excited to be here to share a bit about my journey and what I've learned along the way, with the hope that it really inspires and helps others to take charge of their health. Because as you said, those of us with autoimmune issues, if you have one, you're very likely to have a second and a third and maybe a fourth. And my case, my story, with autoimmunity started when I was just a child, and I was diagnosed with my first autoimmune disease probably when I was around 10, and that was rheumatic fever. Now, at the time, we didn't know it was an autoimmune disease. Autoimmunity was really, if it was a concept, was a new concept at the time. So we treated
Sorry to interrupt. What were the symptoms of rheumatic fever?
A very, very high fever, and that's really all I remember since I was so young, but a really high fever, and I think there might have been some pain with that, and it went on to damage my mitral valve, which is a common side effect of rheumatic fever. But at the time, we treated it with the best medicine had to offer, and that was antibiotics. And then I recovered and went on to live my life. And as you mentioned in your comment in the statistics about autoimmune disease, over the years, I went on to develop more symptoms.
And that's because you didn't address what was really causing the autoimmune dynamic.
Absolutely. And we know now that the autoimmune reaction that was going on that caused the rheumatic fever continued after the antibiotic treatment, and the symptoms went away. And so over the years, while that autoimmune reaction is continuing in my body, it's starting to create more symptoms, because really symptoms are a way of our bodies talking to us. Absolutely. And telling us that something's wrong, something's not functioning well, something is causing irritation or inflammation. And so my body kept talking to me, and I tried to listen, I tried. Most of my life was very proactive about wanting to be healthy, wanting to be active, wanting to feel my best. And so I went to the doctors. I did research. I tried, different diets and different medications. I tried what people recommended for me to address the symptoms. And yet I developed more and more symptoms. And so I think what might be interesting for people to hear about is what some of those symptoms were on my journey to my second autoimmune diagnosis, because I didn't know that any of those could be related to autoimmunity. Mm-hmm. And so I started to develop symptoms like allergies. And so I went to the doctor and they gave me Claritin or Zyrtec or Allegra. Mm-hmm. I tried all of the different allergy medications. Well, that didn't help because the underlying cause was continuing. And so then I went on to develop asthma. And so then I got more medications. And I went on to develop migraines. And then I went on to develop rashes. And then I went on to develop hives.
And most people are not associating these symptoms with an autoimmune dynamic at all, mm-hmm. Right?
Absolutely.
But yeah. it is a real sign that the body is hyper immune, hyper vigilant. The immune system is reacting to everything in your environment, right?
Yes.
And that's
and that's a really great point, right? Because our immune system is there to protect us, mm-hmm. to take care of, attacking any, bad actors, any viruses, bacteria, things that are causing us inflammation, harm, and aren't agreeing with us. Mm-hmm. And so my immune system was hypervigilant, as you put it, trying to get rid of what was causing it problems. And what happens is a concept called molecular mimicry. There are tissues in our body that start to look like gluten or dairy or other proteins and things that can be causing us issues or problems. So the immune system's like, okay, I keep fighting, I keep losing. All right, well, let's go after that over there. And then that's how autoimmune disease happens.
So the tissue in molecular mimicry, the tissue in your body looks very similar to these particles of protein that your body actually is disagreeing with and ends up attacking the tissue then because it looks so similar. Right.
Yes. And in my case, I went on to develop, beyond those symptoms, to develop hives and more problems with fatigue and weight gain. And then I started to lose my hair.
Wow.
And I went to the doctor and I thought I had a brain tumor because, I developed a bald patch on my head right here. And I thought, well, it must be because there's a tumor growing underneath that the hair's falling out. It was like my first instinct. So it was crazy. Oh, but I was scared to death over the weekend until I could get to the doctor. And after some testing, when she said it was alopecia, I said, well, what's that? And she said, it's an autoimmune disease that targets your hair follicles. And that was the first time that I really heard the word autoimmune.
Wow. Okay.
And so
what do you recommend?
Yeah. So I said, so doctor, what do we do to treat it and to prevent it from ever happening again? Mm-hmm. And she looked at me, and for those of you listening who have autoimmune issues, that more often than not, what the doctor says is, there's really not much to do to prevent it from, to treat it or to prevent it from coming back if we can treat it. Really, all we can do is treat the symptoms to help you feel better, but we can't cure autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
And we can't, in many cases, even reverse the symptoms. And that's what the story for autoimmunity has been. And so that's what I was told, that there was not much we could do except treat the symptoms. And I said, well, what does that look like? And so for me, at the time, it was cortisone injections to irritate my scalp so that perhaps the hair follicles would be stimulated to regrow. And so I tried that. And then I tried a lot of other things after that. And I won't go into all the gory details, but suffice it to say that none of the things that I tried were addressing the underlying cause of why was my immune system attacking my hair follicles? Why? And
So how did you go about figuring that out?
So after my alopecia process of trying to address it and finally coming to a place where I decided that all the various treatments and clinical trials were just treating the symptoms and said, I'm not going to do that anymore. I went on to continue to develop more symptoms and feel sicker and sicker. And so I kept searching for answers for my hives and my migraines and the rest of the symptoms. And one day I was at my regular primary care physician's office, and she's smart and she's, wonderful. But I had a real bad case of hives. And I said to her, I'm perplexed. I keep coming in here with new and different symptoms every so often, and we keep treating the symptoms, the hives, the migraines, the, rashes and all of that. And I wonder if there's some way, somehow, that all these symptoms are related. And that if we could dig in deeper into my body and figure out what is causing all of these symptoms, that maybe then they would resolve. And
that was so intuitive of you.
She looked at me like I was from outer space.
Oh my goodness.
And she said, well, you're seeing all the different experts that I've referred you to, right? And I said, I am, of course. And she said, well, that's the best that you can do. And, I left that appointment more frustrated than I'd ever been, but more convinced and had this knowing that there had to be another way. I'm a chemical engineer with an MBA in marketing by background, so I have a real analytical problem solving, bent. So I was like, there has to be a why.
Yeah.
There has to be a why that these things keep happening. So I went from there, and the universe helped. That next weekend, I met a woman who introduced me to functional medicine. Okay. And I asked, well, what's the difference? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a direct link, it took a couple of steps, but I said, well, what's the difference? What's the basic difference? And she said, functional medicine is all about the why. It's all about identifying the root causes. What is causing your body not to function well?
Yeah.
And then you get to the place where you address those issues and help the body support itself in healing. Absolutely. And so I worked with a Chinese medicine doctor, an acupuncturist, a naturopath, a functional medicine nutritionist, a whole variety of experts in addition to my Western medicine. And through that process, identified that I had Hashimoto's, a third autoimmune disease. And that was causing a lot of my symptoms. Okay. So
what did you change when you discovered functional medicine? I assume you were working with a functional medicine practitioner of sorts. What did they recommend that you start with? What did you start with?
So it was really interesting. For those who've never been to worked with a functional medicine practitioner or a nutritionist or coach, the first appointment you have is so different than our regular Western medicine doctor appointments. And so mine was that way too. She took my whole history from the time that my mom was pregnant to when I was born and all the things that happened in between then and
because it's all connected, right?
It's all connected, right? And so based on all of that and my symptoms, she suggested that food sensitivities were likely to be a primary cause or a significant contributor to my autoimmune issues. I thought that was absolutely insane. I'm like,
good to hear, because so many people say no, food, really.
I'm like, really? I'm like, overall, I eat a healthy diet.
Yeah.
I'm from Greece. I eat fish and vegetables and legumes and fruit and yogurt. So a little bit of cheese and bread. But she said, I think the first thing we need to do is an elimination diet. And so I asked her to describe that and why. And she said, well, we're going to eliminate the most inflammatory foods that typically cause people issues and problems, and see, what that does. And I said, okay, so what are those foods? And she said, well, the first two most significant and important ones are gluten and dairy. And then we'll add, for good measure, corn and soy and sugar and, a few other things. And I said, gluten and dairy? What?
I eat that every day.
I'm like, I eat Greek yogurt. That's supposed to be really good for you, really healthy.
Right.
And gluten, I was like, that was just at the beginning. This was about probably 6 to 7 years ago now. So at that point, gluten-free diets were just, becoming more common.
Okay.
And so I thought, with this functional medicine nutritionist, and she's talking about a fad diet like gluten-free. I was stunned, but I didn't believe it for a minute. Okay. So I thought, okay, I don't believe any of this. I didn't say that to her, but I was thinking, I don't believe any of this, but I am desperate to feel better. Nothing I've tried has worked. And she comes highly recommended. So what have I got to lose? I'm going to try it and see what happens. I'll come back and tell her that nothing changed. And then we'll get down to some real science and some real work and some testing, and then we'll see what happens. So to my surprise, absolutely astonishing surprise, I eliminated gluten and dairy and everything else she told me for, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. And
only, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And within 2 weeks, I noticed significant improvement.
Wow.
And the way I noticed, it was kind of interesting, because at the time I was on multiple allergy medications, oral, nose sprays, asthma, 2 different asthma inhalers, you name it, I was on it. And despite that, my eyes would run constantly, and my nose had a permanent red mark from all the sniffles. And I constantly had congestion in my chest, all of that. Wow. And I still had, from my alopecia, I had lost my eyelashes. Okay. So I used to wear makeup around my eyes when I'd be out with clients or meetings and things. And I came back from a lunch meeting, and I was washing my hands in the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror and I noticed that my eye makeup hadn't moved. Before that, I had to reapply it like 3 times a day because my eyes would run so much. I'm like, my eyes aren't running. Oh, that's interesting. So I started to pay attention, and I noticed the congestion had cleared. And I noticed, all these symptoms starting to clear up after 2 weeks.
I find that so great that you highlighted that, because just those few changes in food had such a significant impact, and that you, somebody with multiple autoimmune, most people think it's got to be really complicated to start reversing these symptoms, right?
Right.
And it wasn't. It was fairly simple.
That was just the beginning, right?
Right, absolutely. But, and it's often the beginning for most people.
And the interesting thing is, I'm just going to add one more thing about that. The interesting thing is, so I went back after the 3 weeks, 4 weeks were done, and she said, so how do you feel? What happened? And so I told her, and she said, great, that's such good news. So we've identified, some things that have contributed that have now make you feel better. So are you convinced now that you don't need to eat gluten and dairy, ever again? And I looked at her, I said, whoa, let's not get carried away. That was, 3 or 4 weeks. Maybe there was a change in the allergies, pollen count. something in the air. Maybe it was a fluke. I'm like, I'm not ready to say I'm giving up gluten and dairy for the rest of my life based on 3 or 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
That just seems crazy. Isn't there a test that we can do? And she said, there is a test that we can do. We can do a food sensitivity test and a leaky gut test. And, we can see more scientifically what's going on. And I said, well, then I want to do that test. I'm a science person. Let's do the test.
Right.
And she said, okay. However, to do the test, you have to go back on gluten and dairy for at least, 3 to 4 weeks so that you don't get a false negative. And I said, yay!
Wow.
And I did, and I'll make this quick. I did. I went on gluten and dairy, and I knew within 24 hours of eating gluten and dairy that I shouldn't be eating gluten and dairy, because not only did symptoms come back, but I felt worse than ever. I felt like I'd been run over by a truck the day after having some pizza and beer, because I'm like, gluten and dairy, yay, pizza and beer. And so as the days went on, I kept eating gluten and dairy as she had instructed me so that I could take the testing, because I still wanted to do the testing. I wanted to know. But by the time I got to her office and we did the testing, I knew the answer.
Okay.
I knew. And we did the testing, and the testing validated what I, at that point, already knew, that I should not ever be eating gluten and any kind of dairy protein ever again. The corn and the rest of it, was okay. I mean, it's not great, but it was okay. It was the gluten and dairy.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you did next, because I'm assuming. Okay, tell us what kind of symptoms did resolve with that diet change, and what were the next kind of steps that you started taking to resolve and how far you got?
Yeah, that's a great question. So immediately when I went back on gluten-free, dairy-free diet, my quote unquote allergy symptoms all went away, and I went off of all the allergy meds I'd been on, and inhalers and everything. Then I started to sleep better because I could breathe.
Yeah, right.
And then I started to lose weight, because I had been gaining weight constantly. And I started to lose weight without dieting, without counting calories or without watching how much I ate or what I ate, other than eliminating gluten and dairy. And I started to lose weight. And
you addressed the inflammation, right?
Yeah. And so, bringing that inflammation down, getting rid of the gluten and dairy, which were, targets of my immune system. Now my immune system had an opportunity to, start to relax a bit, to say, okay, it seems we've done our job. Some of these bad actors are gone. So, but I still had some symptoms. I knew I had Hashimoto's. So I still wasn't, I still had some rashes, and I still broke out in hives occasionally. And I still had, the Hashimoto's kind of swings, being cold and then being hot, and brittle nails and dry skin. So I went to work to identify, well, what else can be causing my autoimmune issues and my symptoms. And as you know, within functional medicine, we believe that autoimmune activity can be triggered by, food sensitivities like gluten and dairy, leaky gut, which is aggravated by gluten and food sensitivities, gut dysbiosis, and lots of, hidden infections.
Absolutely.
H. pylori, candida, heavy metals, use of antibiotics and other, NSAIDs, which, I was taking for migraines. So, and stress. Yes. And, I have a mechanical mitral valve that was damaged as a result of my rheumatic fever. And so because of that, I was instructed to take antibiotics anytime I had any dental work. So I'd been taking antibiotics all along. So all of these different factors that can trigger leaky gut and then an autoimmune disease, were contributing to my issues. I just didn't know about all of that, initially. So as I started and continued to work with the functional medicine nutritionists and practitioners, we started to attack each of those areas one at a time. Mm-hmm. And so, we did some work to get rid of my candida and H. pylori. And then I did a heavy metal detox protocol. Yeah. And one of the biggest remaining challenges for me is stress. Because stress
for a lot, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it contributes to a lot of issues physiologically and emotionally, and it really helps perpetuate an autoimmune issue or other chronic illness as well. And so with the work that I did to address, the different factors triggering or contributing to my autoimmunity, I was able to bring my thyroid antibodies that the Hashimoto's had caused back just a bit above normal, so practically normal. Mm-hmm. And all of my other symptoms resolved.
You have your hair.
You know what? My hair still comes and goes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
My hair still comes and goes, which is why I know that there's still another piece of the puzzle to my autoimmune activity and reaction in my body that I need to find. So,
and it's great that you say that, because, anybody with autoimmune should know that it's not one and done. You're not mm-hmm. done. It's a journey. And as long as you could be all on point with the food, but if you're missing one of the other factors, you could get a flare again, right? Yeah.
That's so important. Absolutely. That, it's a journey and it takes time, and it's not, you don't get to a place where you say, I'm cured, now I can go back to doing whatever I was doing before, because then you'll just go back to developing the same symptoms and flares and issues. So, so I'm still on my journey to my best health, and but I feel better now, and I'm going to be 60 in a few months, and I feel better now than I did in my 20s. And I think that one of the most important things that I want anybody listening to this to believe and to hear is that regardless of whether you have symptoms that might be an autoimmune disease, a diagnosis, or multiple diagnoses, there's hope. There's hope that you can, identify and address the underlying causes of those symptoms, of those diagnoses, and then make the changes and really take charge of your health so that you can feel better and you can live your best life. Because I'm living proof of it. And I want that for all of you. And that's really what inspired me and motivated me to take the training at the Functional Medicine Coaching Academy and to become board certified so that I could find a way to create awareness for functional medicine and how adding that approach to your healthcare protocol can really make the difference in your life. And I'm going to take a moment here to just add that, I advocate for a collaborative care approach, which takes the best of Western medicine, the best of functional medicine, the best of other holistic, integrative, complementary modalities, and you pick and choose what works for you, because my story and my journey is mine. Yours might be very different. And one of the things that's really interesting about functional medicine is that for the same diagnosis, there may be 3 or 4 or 5 different paths to get there. So it's not necessarily the same root causes that will generate Hashimoto's diagnosis.
Yeah.
So it's a very personalized approach. And so I advocate for people to, really open up their perspective and look and see what might be helpful for them.
Yeah. That's a brilliant message to close with, I think, Joanne, because it's, I think there's so many people suffering out there that didn't even have an idea about functional medicine at all, right? And that there is hope, and they've been getting the same messages that you got, that only medication, we can only manage the symptoms, and no food or any other lifestyle change is going to help you.
Right.
And you're living proof that it does. And I think that's the important thing, is to show people that there is hope in a different way.
Yeah, it's such an important message for people. And I think the one other thing that I want to make sure that people remember is that it's really important to listen to yourself, to your body, to your intuition. Yeah. Because, for years, the doctors said to me, hey, your lab work looks great. Your cholesterol is good. Your this is good. Everything looks great. Your thyroid looks good. It looks normal. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I asked for the antibody testing did we find out that I actually had the autoimmune Hashimoto's. So, if you feel like even everything looks good and the doctor says everything's fine, if you don't feel good and you sense that there's something wrong, there probably is. So listen to yourself, believe in yourself, and take charge of your health.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such a common message I hear with all my interviewees, that they didn't feel well and the doctor kept saying your labs are fine, and they knew there was something else. So keep digging and keep looking for somebody who will help give you the answers.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's so important. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Joanne. That was wonderful. And I really appreciate the message that you're sharing for others who are suffering from multiple autoimmune diagnoses, or even just one.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here talking with you, and happy to help anyone who has questions. Follow-up questions.
Yeah. How can they reach you? I'll put your website and email address in the notes.
Great. Yeah, I think the best way to reach me is through my email address, joanne@embracefunctionalhealth.org. And I'm happy to, answer questions about what we talked about today, and, explain how people can find a functional medicine practitioner or nutritionist, health coach that might be able to help them given what they're interested in doing. So anything I can do to help.
I hope they take you up on your offer. Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks so much, and I wish
you. Good luck, everyone.